purposes is bound to be assigned to cuts in public pensions and the other chief categories of social spending. As already observed, both reductions in tax progressivity and those in social spending tend to depress employment, thereby contributing also to determine the conditions for the containment of direct wages. To convince ourselves of the relevance of the transmission channel just depicted, suffice it to recall that from Bretton Woods up to the end of the 70s, defense of national sovereignty in the monetary and fiscal fields to be achieved through capital control was regarded and actually constituted the very foundation of the full employment and redistributive policies then pursued by the major capitalist countries. Full liberalization of capital movement, especially in the European context, should therefore be seen as the absolute epitome of the dismissal of those policies. I shall conclude my talk with some short observations on the implications of my analysis for the growth prospects of advanced capitalism and the world economy. It will be readily acknowledged that correcting the factors to which I drew here your attention and back to which the breakdown of wage earners' bargaining power can be traced would require a very long incubation period. This, even if today an awareness had already become widespread of the importance for growth of a market shift in distributive conditions opposite to that which occurred over the last 3 decades. Such an awareness, however, as we all know, is far from being widespread. While the response to the 2007-2008 crisis and the following recession was initially somewhat more promising in the USA than in Europe, as time went by, the US response became increasingly uncertain, with the Obama Democratic administration eventually choosing to cooperate with, rather than confront the opposition, and to increasingly yield to the well-off sections of the population, Wall Street, and the ratings agencies. In spite of the crisis, and the fact that in most countries households persist in being heavily bolstered with debt, governments keep having recourse to austerity packages of an unprecedented rigor. Although it is occasionally acknowledged that this austerity wave is likely to exert in the short run a negative impact on domestic demand and activity levels, the conviction apparently prevails that it cannot fail to eventually bring about the conditions for the resumption of stable growth. Such a forecast is simply riding on faith. It could hardly be more in contrast with the real world, first, because the German solution, growing through exports while at the same time checking the growth of domestic demand, is obviously not viable for capitalism as a whole, and is not even viable for the European Union as a whole. Second, and most importantly, because the fall in employment caused by austerity will produce a further contraction of demand through both the reduction in the number of wage earners and its negative impact on the cost of wages. Austerity, in other words, tends to amplify the distributive imbalances that have brought the crises and the recession about. All in all, distributive conditions within advanced capitalism seem to be converging towards those of the major developing countries. A convergence likely to eventually hindering also the latter's growth. Countries like Brazil, China, India, and Russia are bound to find increasingly hard to transform their exportable surpluses into effective net exports. Export-led growth, both within the developing and the developed world, probably end up being looked at as a sort of paradise lost. A bygone smart solution, though not a generalizable one, to the central contradiction of capitalism, that between its tendency to impede the persistence of situations of relative prosperity of the working class and its persistent need to generate adequate levels of aggregate demand. Over the past few years, the economic crisis and the dense capitalism notwithstanding, major developing countries have kept enjoying fast growth thanks to massive domestic investment in infrastructures and or higher consumption spending by the poorest sections of their population. This has helped avoiding negative rates of growth in a large part of Europe and in the USA. In the longer run, however, it seems to be unlikely that worldwide stagnation may be avoided through Brazilian-type old packages or China-type huge public investments and collapsing dams and crashing high-speed trains. Thank you for your attention.